Entire cities can disappear in a single, terrible day. This is the hidden truth of our shared past. We are about to journey through the stories of 30 ancient civilizations wiped out by sudden cataclysmic events. These were not slow declines, but moments of geological fury and climatic chaos that erased millennia of human achievement in an instant. We will see how a volcano can silence a maritime empire, how a river's betrayal can scatter a sophisticated people, and how a drought can topple a kingdom of stone. By the end, you will gain a new understanding of civilization's fragility and the raw, enduring power of the natural world. How does a society simply vanish, leaving only whispers and ruins? What does the silence of these lost worlds tell us about our own place in history? Picture a city at its peak. Streets hum with conversation, artisans shape metal and clay, and the smoke of 100 hearths rises into a clear sky. This is a living world, a tapestry of countless lives woven together. Now, in a single day, that tapestry is torn. The hum becomes a roar, then a silence so profound it echoes for centuries. This is the brutal reality we must first understand. To grasp how 30 distinct civilizations could simply cease to be, we need a clear definition of the force that erased them. Historians and geologists point to what they call rapid onset cataclysms. These are not decades of drought or generations of slow political decay. These are singular, overwhelming events of geological or climatic violence that strike faster than a society can possibly respond. Think of a volcanic eruption burying a city under meters of hot ash in a matter of hours. A colossal earthquake that flattens every stone building at once. A mega-tsunami, a wall of water born from a distant seabed collapse, crashing over coastal settlements without warning. These events create a stark, unmistakable signature in the ground. Archaeologists call it a destruction horizon, a single layer that acts like a snapshot of disaster. Below it, you find the evidence of daily life, pottery still in place, tools left where they were last used. Above it, often, there is nothing but sterile soil, or the scattered beginnings of a much poorer, simpler society that moved in long after. This immediate violence is what separates these stories from other historical declines. It is the difference between a tree slowly losing its leaves over an autumn, and that same tree being struck by lightning and shattered in an instant. The framework of catastrophe is not about slow change, but about a single, terrible moment that rewrites the entire story. So as we explore each lost world, remember this lens. We are looking for those frozen moments, those layers of ash and rubble, that tell us not just that a culture ended, but exactly how and with what unimaginable speed. The vibrant frescoes of dolphins and bull leapers at Knossos were not mere decoration. They were a declaration. A sophisticated maritime empire, the Minoans of Crete, thrived for centuries, their ships connecting the Aegean world, their palaces bustling with artisans and traders. This was a civilization in full bloom, confident and connected. Then, around 1600 BCE, the island volcano of Thera, just 70 miles north of Crete, tore itself apart in one of the most violent eruptions our planet has ever witnessed. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. The explosion was heard across continents, and the column of ash and rock it blasted into the atmosphere plunged the region into a strange, prolonged twilight. But the immediate horror for the Minoans arrived from the sea. The volcano's catastrophic collapse into its empty magma chamber generated tsunamis of staggering power. Waves, estimated by researchers to be over 100 feet high, raced across the open water. Within an hour, these walls of water would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete, where the Minoans had built their most vital ports, their bustling coastal towns, and the heart of their naval fleet. In a single morning, the very source of their wealth and power, the sea, turned against them with unimaginable force. The devastation did not end with the waves. Archaeologist Colin MacDonald notes that a thick, suffocating blanket of volcanic ash, sometimes meters deep, fell across eastern Crete. This ash did not just cover the land, it poisoned it. It smothered fields, choked crops, and contaminated freshwater sources. The following seasons brought not bounty, but famine. A society can survive a blow to its cities, but a sustained blow to its food supply is a wound that weakens the entire body politic. The Minoan civilization was not erased in a single day, but the cataclysm from Thera broke its backbone. Their fleet was shattered, their agricultural heartland was crippled, and their intricate trade networks fell silent. In this profoundly weakened state, they became vulnerable. Within a few generations, outsiders from the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans, would move into the power vacuum, occupying Knossos and weaving Minoan achievements into their own legends. This is why the story of Thera resonates so deeply with the myth of Atlantis, a great island kingdom that sank beneath the waves in a day and a night. It is a cultural memory, a story forged from the trauma of losing a brilliant world to the raw, indifferent fury of the earth. The Minoans stand as our first clear example, a template of how geological violence can fatally unravel even the most advanced and seemingly secure society. The silence of the Indus Valley is a different kind of mystery. While the Minoans faced a sudden blast from the sea and sky, the people of the Indus or Harappan civilization faced a betrayal from the very source of their life, their rivers. For over 700 years, their world was a marvel of order. The great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were laid out in precise grids, their homes equipped with advanced drainage and bathing platforms, their bricks made to a universal standard. This was not a culture of grand palaces or obvious rulers, but one of remarkable civic planning and social harmony, a testament to a society in balance with its environment. That balance was shattered around 1900 BCE, not by a fiery explosion, but by a profound and catastrophic thirst. Emerging research paints a troubling picture. Geologist Liviu Giosan and his colleagues have used satellite imagery and sediment cores to reconstruct the ancient landscape. Their work suggests the lifeblood of the civilization, the Gaga-Hakra river system, began to falter. A major tectonic event, possibly an earthquake that altered the land itself, may have suddenly diverted the river's crucial sources of water. The reliable monsoons that fed the river weakened, and a prolonged, severe drought set in. The agricultural base that supported those vast, orderly cities simply dried up. But the final blow may have been paradoxical, a cruel twist of hydrological fate. When the rains did finally return after years of drought, they likely came not as a gentle relief, but in torrential, devastating floods. The parched earth could not absorb the deluge, and the very riverbeds the Harappans depended on became channels of destruction, washing away fields and settlements. This 1-2 punch of drought and flood would have been catastrophic. It was not a slow migration where people had time to plan and adapt. It was a rapid environmental collapse that fractured a unified culture. Populations were forced to scatter into smaller, isolated groups, moving eastward in search of reliable water. The sophisticated urban identity, the shared systems of weights and measures, and that still undeciphered script all faded away as people turned their energy from maintaining a grand civilization to simply surviving. The great cities were not destroyed in a violent conquest. They were quietly, systematically abandoned, left for the dust to reclaim. What does their fate tell us? The Harappans mastered urban planning to an unprecedented degree, yet their entire world was built on the assumption of a stable, benevolent river. When that river changed its course, either through gradual shift or sudden tectonic betrayal, their most advanced infrastructure was rendered meaningless. Their story is a powerful lesson in foundational vulnerability, reminding us that no matter how sophisticated our society becomes, its ultimate foundation rests on the fragile, shifting systems of the natural world. The silence of their ruins speaks not of invasion but of dispersal, a culture unraveled by a changing sky and a disappearing stream. The mighty walls of Mycenae were built to defy armies, not the earth itself. This was a warrior culture immortalized by Homer, a network of powerful palace centers ruling over the Greek world from their hilltop fortresses. Their records, written in a script called Linear B, speak of a complex, hierarchical society organized for trade, industry, and war. Yet around 1200 BCE, this entire political and economic system disintegrated in what historians term the Late Bronze Age collapse. While many factors were at play, from climate shifts to mysterious groups known as the Sea Peoples, the ground beneath their feet may have delivered the first decisive blow. Archaeologist Spyros Iacovides points to a clear pattern found at sites like Turins and Pylos. The destruction layers there show not the scattered ash of a fire, but something more systematic. Walls collapsed inward or toppled in a single direction, storerooms buried under fallen masonry. This is the unmistakable signature of powerful, repeated earthquakes. For the Mycenaeans, whose identity and power were literally set in stone within their massive citadels, a seismic event was more than a physical disaster. It was a direct assault on the very symbol of their authority. When the palace walls, believed to be unshakable, crumbled, so too did the confidence of the people who depended on that central authority for distribution of food, for protection, and for order. The earthquakes acted as a catastrophic catalyst. They shattered the infrastructure of control at the very moment the civilization was facing other mounting pressures, like prolonged drought that strained agricultural yields. The physical destruction would have disrupted trade routes, crippled food storage, and created a crisis of legitimacy for the ruling class. In the ensuing chaos, the delicate network of specialized craftsmen, scribes, and administrators that kept the palace system running simply fell apart. The knowledge of Linear B, used exclusively for palace accounting, was lost because the palaces that needed it were gone. What followed was not a new kingdom rising, but a centuries-long period often called the Greek Dark Age. Population plummeted, people moved from the plains to remote, easily defended hills, and the art of writing vanished from the region for generations. The Mycenaean collapse shows us that a cataclysm's most damaging effect can be social. An earthquake does not just topple buildings, it can topple the entire idea of centralized power, unraveling the complex web of trust and logistics that holds an advanced society together. The stones of Mycenae still whisper of a time when the earth refused to be still, and a civilization built on order found itself plunged into a long, deep silence. Those stone heads in the jungle hold a gaze that has lasted for millennia. The Olmecs of ancient Mexico carved these monumental portraits, rulers or deities of a society so foundational it is often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. From around 1500 to 400 BCE, they pioneered complex rituals, a calendar system, and a distinct artistic style, all radiating from great ceremonial centers like La Venta, built not of stone but of earth and clay in a landscape of rivers and swamps. Theirs was a civilization in deep conversation with its environment, a balance that was shattered not by invasion, but by a change in the very air they breathed. Around 400 BCE, the vibrant centers fell silent. Archaeologist Anne Cyphers points to a key clue. It was not a slow abandonment with layers of gradual decay. The evidence suggests a rapid depopulation, as if the people simply left and did not return. What could cause an entire people to walk away from their sacred heartland? The answer may lie in the distant, smoldering peaks that ring the region. A series of major volcanic eruptions, potentially from Popocatépetl or other volcanoes, are believed to have filled the skies with a persistent veil of ash and sulfur. This would have triggered what climatologists term a volcanic winter, where sunlight is scattered back into space for years. For an agricultural society like the Olmecs, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Crops would have failed under the dim, cool skies. The once fertile soils along their riverbanks were likely buried or poisoned by repeated ash falls, rendering them infertile for a generation. The result was not just hunger, but a complete breakdown of the social contract that held their world together. When the land can no longer feed the people who built temples upon it, those temples become monuments to a broken promise. Forced into a diaspora, Olmec communities likely scattered into smaller groups, migrating into different ecological zones in search of sustenance. This physical scattering led to a cultural dissolution. Without the centralizing force of their great ceremonial complexes, the intricate web of shared ritual, iconography, and authority unraveled. Their legacy, however, did not die. It was carried like seeds in the wind by those migrating groups. The ideas of the Olmecs, their reverence for the jaguar, their concepts of sacred space and rulership, took root in the cultures that followed, most notably the Maya. The Olmec civilization itself was extinguished, but its intellectual and spiritual innovations became the bedrock for future civilizations. This story presents a profound irony. A culture deeply attuned to the earth was ultimately undone by the earth's most violent exhalations. It shows us that a cataclysm need not bury a city under lava to erase it. Sometimes it simply dims the sun, turns the soil cold, and watches as a great and unified people quietly disperses, leaving only stone faces behind to ponder the silent sky. A single, silent stone obelisk can tell a story of vanished power. In the highlands of what is now Ethiopia, the kingdom of Aksum rose to become a giant of the ancient world, its influence stretching from the heart of Africa across the Red Sea to southern Arabia. This was no isolated culture. It was a commercial and political powerhouse that minted its own gold coins, traded with Rome and India, and erected monumental stelae, some over 100 feet tall, as markers of its rulers' divine authority. Their wealth was built on a foundation of reliable agriculture and control of lucrative maritime trade routes. Then, with surprising speed after the 7th century CE, this empire contracted, its grand capital slowly abandoned, its political unity dissolving. For a long time, historians pointed to the rise of Islamic caliphates shifting trade away from the Red Sea, but newer evidence reveals a more fundamental, earth-driven cause. Paleoclimatologists, scientists who study ancient climate, have drilled deep into the sediments of nearby lakes. These mud cores act like a timeline of the environment, and they reveal a stark, sudden shift towards intense and prolonged aridity right at the pivotal moment of Aksum's decline. The kingdom's breadbasket, dependent on predictable seasonal rains, was struck by a drought that may have lasted for generations. This was not merely a few bad harvests, it was a systemic, climatic betrayal that crippled the empire from within. The drought's origin may have been global in scale. Research suggests a period of heightened volcanic activity around the world, which can spew sun-blocking particles into the atmosphere, disrupting weather patterns for years. Whether from this or other natural cycles, the result for Aksum was the same: failing crops, famine, and a desperate, shrinking population. The environmental stress created a cascade of failures. As historian David Philipson notes, the empire contracted swiftly. With agricultural output collapsing, the state could no longer sustain the dense population around its capital or feed the laborers and soldiers that upheld its authority. The economic engine sputtered. Simultaneously, another slow-moving disaster unfolded along the coast. Centuries of intensive farming in the highlands, likely accelerated as people tried to cope with the drought, led to severe deforestation and soil erosion. Torrents of silt washed down the rivers, gradually clogging the vital ports on the Red Sea. Aksum's magnificent trading ships found their harbors turning into mudflats, severing the kingdom's lifeline to the wider world's wealth. The combination was devastating, a climate-driven agricultural collapse from within, and a self-inflicted strangulation of its trade routes from without. The great stelae were left standing as the political and economic structures that built them crumbled away. People did not vanish, but they did disperse, retreating to more sustainable, scattered highland settlements. The centralized state, unable to command resources or project power, simply ceased to function. Aksum's story is a profound lesson in interconnected fragility. It shows that a civilization can be brought low not by a single explosive event, but by a tightening knot of environmental pressures, where a changing climate weakens the foundation, and human adaptation to that change inadvertently severs the connections that allow for recovery. The empire did not fall to an army. It was slowly, inexorably starved and isolated by the very land and sea it once commanded. Their great houses were not just homes but calendars in stone. In the high desert of what is now New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloan people, often associated with Chaco Canyon, engineered a cultural masterpiece. They constructed massive, multi-story complexes with precise astronomical alignments, drawing people from across the region for ceremony and commerce. This was a spiritual and economic hub, a testament to human ingenuity in a landscape that offered little margin for error. Then, in the 12th and 13th centuries, this center of the world went quiet. Tree ring data, the precise diary of past climates, tells us why with chilling clarity. A mega-drought descended upon the region, a dry period so severe and prolonged it makes our modern droughts seem brief by comparison. For roughly 50 years, the rain simply failed to arrive in meaningful amounts. In an environment where every drop of water was already carefully managed, this was not a hardship, it was a death sentence for their way of life. The ancestral Puebloans were master dryland farmers relying on maize, a crop that demands specific seasonal moisture. Archaeologist Stephen Lexon explains that this 50-year drought would have devastated their agricultural base. Cornfields that once fed a complex society withered in the sun, season after season. The carefully engineered systems of water capture and soil conservation could not compensate for a sky that held back its bounty for generations. The environmental shock was absolute, but a disaster of this scale does more than empty granaries. It strains the social fabric to its breaking point. The great houses of Chaco were symbols of collective effort and shared belief, but as resources vanished, the trust that held the system together may have frayed. In the face of unrelenting scarcity, the very ceremonies and trade that defined Chaco could no longer sustain its population. The response was not a slow retreat, but a swift and decisive exodus. Within a generation, the canyon and much of the surrounding San Juan Basin were depopulated. Families and community groups did not vanish, they moved, migrating to areas with more reliable water sources, like the mesa tops and river valleys where their descendants, the Pueblo peoples, would thrive. They took their knowledge, their stories, and their identity with them, leaving the magnificent stone structures as a monument to a different time. Chaco's abandonment is a powerful lesson in ecological limits. It shows a civilization that brilliantly adapted to a challenging environment, pushing its potential to create something extraordinary. Yet, when the climate shifted beyond the parameters their adaptations were built for, the entire experiment reached a sudden, inevitable end. Their story asks us a difficult question. How do we recognize the line between mastering our environment and becoming perilously dependent on its stability? The silent windows of the great houses look out on a desert that holds the answer, a reminder that even the most sophisticated societies are in a constant, delicate negotiation with the natural world. Their stone gaze is turned away from the sea, a choice that speaks volumes. On the remote, wind-swept island of Rapa Nui, the monumental Moche statues stand as a haunting paradox, symbols of a society's incredible ambition and perhaps the very cause of its undoing. This civilization story is one of a slow burn that ignited into a sudden, violent flash. For centuries, the Polynesian settlers thrived in what early explorers described as a subtropical paradise, rich with dense palm forests. This ecosystem was their toolbox, providing wood for homes, for fires, and most critically, for the massive rollers and ropes needed to transport their iconic stone giants across the island. The society that erected these statues was complex and competitive, with different clans vying for prestige through ever larger moai construction. But this very drive for monumental achievement set in motion a chain of ecological consequences. As researcher Jared Diamond has famously argued, the islanders likely cut down their forests faster than they could regrow, a process scholars term ecocide. This was not malice, but a tragic mismatch between human ambition and environmental reality on a finite, isolated island. The loss of the palms was a catastrophe in slow motion that reached a sudden, terrible tipping point. Without trees, the thin soil eroded rapidly under wind and rain, devastating sweet potato farms. Without large timber, building seaworthy fishing canoes became impossible, cutting off a vital protein source. The society found itself trapped, starving on an island they could no longer leave. Archaeological evidence suggests this prolonged environmental stress culminated in a rapid and brutal cultural collapse. The period following the deforestation shows a stark shift. Moai carving ceased abruptly. The great statues, symbols of ancestral power and clan unity, were deliberately toppled. The archaeological record reveals an increase in spear points and, in the later layers, signs of extreme societal hardship and conflict. The once unified culture fractured into warring factions, fighting over the island's dwindling resources. This period of intense internal violence and societal breakdown represents the sudden, human-catalyzed cataclysm that finished the civilization Europeans later encountered. When Dutch explorers arrived on Easter Sunday in 1722, they met not the builders of a great tradition, but the diminished descendants living in a scarred landscape. While European contact later brought further devastation through disease and exploitation, the internal collapse was already complete. The story of Rapa Nui is perhaps our most intimate cautionary tale. It demonstrates how a society, through practices that seem sustainable in the short term, can unknowingly engineer the conditions for its own rapid, violent demise. It is a story not of a people conquered by nature, but of a culture that, in its pursuit of greatness, inadvertently dismantled the very life support system that made that greatness possible. The silent moai, their backs to the ocean that could no longer offer escape, stand as eternal witnesses to this fragile balance. The pyramids of Tikal were once a skyline of human ambition. During the Classic period from around 250 to 900 CE, the Maya lowlands pulsed with life. Great city-states like Palenque and Kapon were hubs of intellectual and artistic achievement, where scribes recorded history on bark paper, astronomers tracked the cycles of Venus, and kings performed elaborate rituals to ensure the favor of the gods and the arrival of life-giving rains. This was a civilization at its zenith, a complex network of rival kingdoms bound by shared beliefs and a deep understanding of their environment. Then, within the span of a single century, this entire political and cultural edifice in the southern lowlands crumbled. The famed Maya collapse was not a single dramatic explosion, but a perfect storm of pressures where a changing climate lit the fuse. Scientists have found a precise record of this change not in ruins but in caves. Stalagmites, those stone pillars growing up from cave floors, act as natural climate archives. As rainwater drips from the cave ceiling, it deposits minerals layer by layer, and the chemical signature of those layers reveals how wet or dry each year was. Stalagmite data from the region tells a stark story. Beginning around the 8th century, the Maya heartland was struck by a series of severe, multi-decade droughts, some of the worst the area had experienced in thousands of years. For a society whose agriculture, and therefore its entire surplus, was exquisitely timed to seasonal rains, this was a catastrophe in slow motion. Expert Lisa Lucero explains that these droughts meant failed maize harvests year after year. The elaborate reservoir systems that supported massive urban populations like the one at Tikal would have slowly emptied, turning from lifelines into empty stone bowls. This prolonged environmental stress did not just cause hunger, it shattered the social contract. Maya kings derived their divine right to rule from their perceived ability to communicate with the gods and guarantee rain and fertility. When the rains failed for generations, despite ever more desperate and extravagant rituals, that divine authority evaporated. The resulting crisis of legitimacy ignited a vicious cycle. As resources dwindled, competition flared. Warfare, once a ritualized affair for capturing nobles, likely became more frequent and brutal, a fight for surviving farmlands and dwindling water sources. Inscriptions on stone monuments from this final era shift from records of cosmic events and royal births to boasts of conquest and the destruction of rival cities. The political fabric unraveled. One by one, the great ceremonial centers of the southern lowlands were abandoned. The pyramids were not destroyed by invaders, they were simply left as the population that sustained them either dispersed into smaller, scattered communities or migrated north to the Yucatan where water was more accessible. The jungle wasted no time in reclaiming its territory, weaving roots through palace walls and burying plazas under a green blanket. It is crucial to remember that the Maya people did not vanish. Their descendants thrive today, preserving languages and traditions. What ended was a specific, centralized political model, the classic period civilization of powerful, competing city-states. Their story is a profound lesson in systemic vulnerability. It shows that a civilization can be remarkably resilient to many shocks, but when a core pillar of its belief system and its practical survival, like reliable rainfall, is pulled away, the entire structure can come down with startling speed. The silent pyramids stand as monuments not to a mysterious disappearance, but to a harsh truth that even the most brilliant societies exist in a delicate balance with the world around them, a balance that can be broken by a sky that stays clear for too long. A stone church in Greenland holds the last echo of a European dream. At Valsey, the Norse settlers built a sturdy chapel of imported stone, a defiant symbol of their old world identity on the edge of the Arctic wilderness. For nearly 5 centuries, these Viking descendants maintained 2 remote settlements, raising livestock, holding tithes, and trading walrus ivory with the homeland. Theirs was a society clinging to the familiar in a landscape that demanded flexibility. Their end came not with a bang, but with a creeping, inescapable cold. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the abrupt onset of what we now call the Little Ice Age gripped the North Atlantic. This was not a gradual cooling, but a rapid climatic deterioration that reshaped their world within a few generations. Historian Thomas McGovern's work paints a stark picture of the consequences. Growing seasons shortened dramatically, making it impossible to raise enough hay to sustain their herds of cattle and sheep through the long, now even harsher winters. The sea, their vital connection to Iceland and Norway, became a treacherous barrier. Thick, persistent sea ice choked the sailing routes for months longer than before, preventing the supply ships that brought essential iron, timber, and cultural reinforcement. At the same time, increased storminess made the already perilous voyages nearly suicidal. The settlements were not just starving, they were utterly cut off. This environmental squeeze was compounded by a tragic cultural rigidity. As conditions worsened, the Norse found themselves sharing the island with the Thule culture ancestors of the modern Inuit, masters of Arctic survival. The Inuit thrived using sophisticated techniques, hunting seals and whales from kayaks in the icy waters, and building warm, efficient shelters from snow and skin. The Norse, however, largely refused to adopt these methods. Their identity was tied to being pastoralists and Christians, not nomadic hunters. They continued to try to farm land that could no longer support them, and viewed the Inuit with a mixture of fear and disdain. This refusal to adapt their core subsistence strategy left them fatally vulnerable. The final act was likely a combination of malnutrition, growing isolation, and possibly conflict over the dwindling resources. The last written record from the settlement is a brief account of a wedding at H-Valsey Church in 1408. After that, only silence. When a ship finally managed to land decades later, the explorers found empty farms, scattered bones of starved livestock, and no survivors. The Greenland Norse represent a uniquely poignant kind of catastrophe. They were not wiped out by a single volcanic winter or a mega-tsunami, but by a rapid climatic shift that turned their sustainable way of life into a death trap. Their story is a powerful lesson in the danger of cultural inflexibility. They possessed the knowledge to survive, literally living next to people who demonstrated it daily, yet their commitment to who they were prevented them from becoming what they needed to be. The lonely church at H-Valsey stands not as a ruin of conquest, but as a monument to a community that faded away, trapped between a changing world and an unchanging sense of self. Angkor was a city built on water. At its peak, the Khmer Empire's capital was the largest pre-industrial urban complex on Earth, a sprawling metropolis sustained by an engineering marvel, a vast and intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and moats. This hydraulic system was the empire's beating heart, taming the seasonal monsoon rains to feed immense rice paddies and support a population of perhaps 1 million people. The grandeur of temples like Angkor Wat symbolized not just spiritual devotion, but absolute mastery over a challenging environment. That mastery, however, depended on a delicate and predictable balance between wet and dry. In the 14th and 15th centuries, that balance was shattered. Scientists like Brendan Buckley have turned to an unlikely source for answers: the ancient trees of Southeast Asia. By studying the growth rings in centuries-old cypress trees, they have reconstructed a climate history of profound instability. The data reveals a catastrophic sequence, a series of intense, multi-year droughts in the mid-1300s, followed abruptly by periods of extreme monsoonal flooding. This was not a gentle shift but a violent climatic oscillation, a 1-2 punch that the Khmer's brilliant engineering was never designed to withstand. Imagine the first blow, the drought. As the rains failed year after year, the massive reservoirs like the West Barre, which held billions of gallons of water, would have dropped to alarming lows. The canals feeding the city's rice fields ran dry, crops withered, and the food surplus that powered the empire's labor force and its military began to vanish. The social stress would have been immense, but the system might have recovered if the drought had been the only challenge. The second blow was the flood. When the monsoons finally returned, they did so with a vengeance, unleashing torrents of water that the parched and damaged landscape could not absorb. These were not life-giving rains, they were walls of water. Researchers suggest these extreme floods would have breached and eroded the carefully engineered canal banks, while washing enormous quantities of silt into the critical reservoirs. In a short time, the meticulously maintained hydraulic network, the very foundation of Angkor's power, would have been clogged, broken, and rendered dysfunctional. The consequence was a rapid, cascading failure. With the water management system in ruins, famine became widespread. The authority of the god-kings in Angkor, who derived their power from ensuring fertility and order, would have evaporated as quickly as the last drops in the reservoirs. Facing starvation and a breakdown of central authority, the population had little choice but to disperse, abandoning the great stone capital to seek sustenance elsewhere. The city was not destroyed by an invading army. It was simply left as the jungle patiently wove its roots through the broken causeways and empty temples. Angkor's story is a profound lesson in the limits of human control. It showcases a civilization that reached staggering heights by engineering its environment, yet remained utterly vulnerable to sudden, severe swings in the very climate patterns it sought to manage. Their retreat was not a slow decline, but a rapid civilizational unraveling triggered by the climate's refusal to follow the script. It asks us a haunting question about our own world. How resilient are our most complex systems when nature decides to rewrite the rules? Their archives held treaties with pharaohs, a testament to superpower status. The Hittite Empire of Anatolia was a colossus of the late Bronze Age, a military and diplomatic equal to ancient Egypt. Its capital Hattusa protected by monumental walls and stocked with thousands of clay tablets detailing laws, rituals, and international correspondence. This was a state built on order, grain, and iron. Its end, around 1200 BCE, was not a single event but a cascade, where a sudden ecological nightmare exposed every other weakness. A series of letters sent from the Hittite court to the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah survives, and their tone is one of raw, unvarnished desperation. They plead for urgent shipments of grain, stating that people in their land are dying. This was not a minor shortage, but a catastrophic, multi-year famine that gripped the Anatolian heartland. Paleoclimate data suggests this famine was likely triggered by a severe, prolonged drought, a regional climate disaster that devastated the agricultural base of an empire. A state cannot command armies or enforce treaties on an empty stomach. The famine acted as a systemic poison, weakening the Hittite state's ability to feed its population, pay its soldiers, and maintain the loyalty of its outlying territories. As historian Trevor Bryce notes, the central authority dissolved within a generation. A starving periphery has little reason to obey a capital that can no longer provide security or sustenance. This profound vulnerability was then exploited by other forces. The same period saw increased seismic activity in the region, with archaeological evidence at Hattusa and other sites pointing to significant earthquake damage. The very walls meant to defy armies were shaken by the earth itself, and into this moment of internal crisis came external pressure from the movement of various groups, those the Egyptian records ominously call the Sea Peoples. While the exact identity of these groups is still debated, their impact is clear. They represented a wave of disruption, migration, and conflict that washed over the weakened structures of the Bronze Age world. For the Hittites, already reeling from famine and seismic shocks, these incursions were a final, overwhelming blow. Their case is a masterclass in how a sudden ecological crisis becomes a critical vulnerability. The famine did not directly destroy the empire, but it shattered its resilience, its social cohesion, and its logistical power. It turned a formidable fortress state into a fragile shell, one that could not withstand the earthquakes and migrations that followed. The great archives of Hattusa fell silent, not burned by a conqueror, but abandoned as the complex machinery of empire seized up and broke apart. Their story reminds us that the true strength of a civilization often lies not in its tallest walls, but in the resilience of its fields and the stability of the climate that sustains them. When that foundation crumbles, even the mightiest political structures can fragment with startling speed. The Hittite archives fell silent as their world fragmented from within, but another, far older collapse was marked by fire and a profound collective choice. In the fertile plains between the Dniester and Dnieper rivers, a Neolithic society thrived for over 2 millennia, building settlements of a scale that still astonishes archaeologists. The Cucuteni-Trypillia culture, flourishing from around 5500 to 3500 BCE, constructed vast, planned communities. Some of their sites contained over 2,000 dwellings arranged in concentric rings, housing thousands of residents, making them larger than any city in Mesopotamia or Europe at that time. These were not temporary camps, but substantial, long-term homes with clay ovens and intricate painted pottery, evidence of a stable, sophisticated, and deeply rooted society. Their end, however, is recorded in a layer of ash that tells a mysterious and deliberate story. At site after site, archaeologists uncover the same pattern, not a haphazard destruction layer from conflict, but a uniform blanket of charcoal and fired clay. Every single house in a settlement was systematically burned to the ground. This was not an accident, nor was it the work of an invading enemy. The evidence points to a ritual act, a purposeful firing carried out by the inhabitants themselves. After the flames died down, the entire community would gather their belongings, leave the scorched earth behind, and relocate to a fresh site, where they would build an entirely new village from scratch, only to repeat the cycle generations later. For centuries, this practice was part of their cultural rhythm, a symbolic closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. But around 3500 BCE, something changed. The practice of burning and moving appears to have become unsustainable, and the entire culture, which had endured for so long, dissolved and faded from history. Why would a successful civilization abandon a practice that had defined it for generations? Many researchers now look to the skies and the soil. Paleoclimate data indicates a significant shift during this period towards a cooler and much wetter climate in Eastern Europe. Increased rainfall and flooding could have made low-lying settlement sites, once ideal for agriculture, suddenly untenable, turning fertile fields into waterlogged marshes. Faced with this rapid environmental change, the Cucuteni-Trypillia people may have been forced to relocate not by choice, but by necessity, and at a frequency their social structure could not withstand. The stress of constantly abandoning complex settlements, moving entire communities, and rebuilding from zero every few decades would have been immense. It would have strained their ability to maintain large, cohesive populations, fragmenting them into smaller, more mobile groups. In this fragmented state, they would have been far more susceptible to being absorbed by other, incoming pastoralist cultures from the steppes, groups like the Yamnaya, who were increasingly on the move. Their disappearance, then, represents a different kind of cataclysm. It was not a single day of geological violence, but a rapid cultural unraveling triggered by environmental pressure. The ritual burning, once a symbol of renewal, may have become a frantic response to a world that was becoming unpredictably hostile. Their story asks us to consider the limits of adaptation, how even a deeply ingrained and successful way of life can reach a tipping point when the environment shifts too quickly. The silent rings of ash are not just the remains of houses, but the physical signature of a society that chose to transform its world with fire, until finally, the world outside gave it no place left to burn. Sargon of Akkad forged the blueprint for empire itself. His domain was unprecedented, a vast political entity stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, uniting diverse peoples under a single administration for the first time in recorded history. This was the Akkadian Empire, a superpower built on military might and critically on the bounty of its farmlands. Its northern territories, in what is now Syria and Iraq, relied on reliable seasonal rains to grow the grain that fed its armies and cities. Then, around 2150 BCE, this foundational pillar of power simply vanished. The empire shattered with a speed that left its own scribes in despair. They recorded this catastrophe in a haunting text known as the Curse of Akkad, which laments that the large fields produced no grain, the irrigated orchards produced no syrup, and the flooded fields produced no fish. This was not poetic metaphor, but a stark record of systemic collapse. Modern science has given a name to the force behind this ancient lament, the 4.2 kilo-year event. This was not a local drought, but a profound and rapid shift in global climate patterns, an aridification event so severe its signature is locked in ice cores from Greenland and sediment layers from oceans worldwide. For the Akkadian Empire, it meant a mega-drought that gripped the region for over a century. The rain-fed agricultural north, the empire's breadbasket, turned to dust. Without those grain shipments, the entire economic and logistical network seized up. Famine spread, and with it came social chaos. Populations from the desiccated north were forced into mass migration, moving southward into the irrigated heartland along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This sudden influx of desperate people strained the southern cities to their breaking point, overwhelming their carefully managed canal systems and leading to conflict over dwindling resources. The centralized authority in the capital city of Akkad, unable to command the weather or feed its people, lost all legitimacy. The empire did not fall to a foreign conqueror. It fragmented from within, dissolving back into the smaller, squabbling city-states it had once unified. The story of the Akkadian collapse is monumental in its clarity. It stands as one of the earliest and most definitive examples of a powerful, complex state being decisively terminated not by invasion or poor leadership, but by a rapid, long-term shift in the global climate. It demonstrates that even the most innovative political structures are ultimately hostage to environmental stability. The silence that followed Sargon's dynasty was not empty. It was filled with the difficult lessons of a world learning, too late, that an empire is only as strong as the harvests that sustain it. The vivid murals of the Moche were not just art, they were a contract with the gods. On the stark, rainless coast of northern Peru, this civilization built its world from the desert itself, erecting monumental adobe pyramids like the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna. Their society was a theocracy, where priest-kings performed elaborate ceremonies to maintain cosmic order and ensure the flow of water from distant mountain sources through intricate canals. For centuries, this delicate balance held. Then, in the 6th century CE, the sky broke its own rules. The culprit was a climatic phenomenon we know today as El Niño, but the events that struck the Moche were of a magnitude so extreme, scientists call them mega El Niños. These are not the periodic weather shifts of modern times, but rare, catastrophic reversals of the Pacific's very heartbeat. For the hyper-arid coast, it meant the impossible, torrential, unending rain. Where decades might pass without a single drop, sudden, violent storms pounded the desert for months. As archaeologist Santiago Uceda discovered at the Huaca de la Luna, the evidence is literal layers of tragedy. Excavations reveal thick strata of flood deposits, walls of silt and mud that buried entire sections of the sacred city in a single, devastating event. The landscape, sculpted over millennia for aridity, could not absorb this deluge. The result was catastrophic flooding of biblical proportions. Raging torrents, called huecos, tore down from the Andes, smashing through the carefully engineered irrigation canals that were the civilization's lifeline. These weren't just broken ditches, they were severed arteries. Farmlands were scoured away or buried under meters of sterile gravel. Landslides buried settlements at the feet of mountains. The immediate destruction was only the first act of a cruel climatic play. Following the epic floods, the pendulum often swings the other way, into a prolonged and severe drought. The Moche were caught in this whiplash, a cycle of drowning and then parching. The dual assault was more than their infrastructure could bear. Crops failed completely, leading to widespread famine. In such a society, where the ruling elite derived their power directly from their perceived ability to mediate with the gods for water and fertility, this was a crisis of faith as much as a crisis of food. The magnificent murals depicting the deity Ea-Peak, the Decapitator, may have taken on a terrifying new meaning. When the priest's rituals failed to stop the floods or bring back the rains, the social contract shattered. Archaeological evidence suggests this period ended in significant violence at some major centers. The classic, unified Moche political structure collapsed under the weight of mud and hunger. This was not a total extinction of the people, but a sudden, violent end to their specific phase of centralized power. Some groups likely migrated, others restructured into smaller, less grandiose chiefdoms in slightly more forgiving valleys. The Great Pyramids were abandoned, their bright murals fading under the returning sun. The Moche story is a powerful lesson in specialized adaptation meeting an unpredictable climate. They mastered a desert, but their mastery was built for a specific, stable pattern of absence, not for a sudden, overwhelming presence of water. Their civilization was not washed away by an invading force, but by the sky itself, fulfilling an ancient contract in the most devastating way possible. A desperate letter sent from the port of Ugarit was never answered. In it, a local official warns his superior that enemy ships have been sighted, adding that his own forces are away, deployed elsewhere. This clay tablet, baked hard in the fires that consumed the city, captures the precise moment a world ended. The Canaanite city-states of the Levant, places like Ugarit, Hazor, and Megiddo, were not isolated outposts. They were the vibrant commercial and cultural crossroads of the late Bronze Age, wealthy hubs where Egyptian, Hittite, and Mesopotamian influences mingled. Their ports bustled with trade, their scribes corresponded with kings, and their libraries held epic poetry. Then, around 1200 BCE, this entire network of sophisticated urban centers was violently erased, leaving behind a uniform layer of ash and collapsed masonry. For decades, the simple explanation pointed to a single, terrifying culprit: the mysterious sea peoples, marauders from the sea whose invasions are recorded in Egyptian reliefs. But to blame them alone is to mistake the final spark for the firestorm. Modern archaeology reveals a far more complex and devastating sequence, a perfect storm where environmental and social pressures created a tinderbox, waiting for that single, sudden match. The first pressure was climatic. Tree ring and sediment core data from the region indicate a severe, prolonged drought gripped the eastern Mediterranean right at this pivotal time. For agricultural societies dependent on rain-fed crops, this meant failing harvests, famine, and the social unrest that inevitably follows scarcity. At the same time, geological evidence points to a period of intense seismic activity. The ground itself became unreliable, with earthquakes damaging fortifications and infrastructure at critical moments. These twin disasters, drought and earthquake, did not destroy the cities outright, but they critically weakened them from within. They strained food supplies, shattered confidence in both the gods and the ruling class, and stretched military resources thin as they dealt with internal crises. It was into this landscape of profound vulnerability that the movements of various groups, the Sea Peoples, arrived. They were likely not a unified army, but a chaotic mix of displaced populations, climate refugees, and opportunistic raiders, all set in motion by the same wider collapse affecting the Hittites and Mycenaeans. For the already crippled Canaanite cities, their arrival was the final, overwhelming blow. The letter from Ugarit tells the whole story. The army was not there to defend the city because it was already dealing with another crisis, possibly an internal revolt or a threat elsewhere. The city was a hollow shell, its strength sapped by years of hardship, and when the ships appeared on the horizon, there was simply nothing left to stop them. The destruction was total and simultaneous. This is why the cataclysm of the Canaanite city-state stands apart. It represents a cascade failure, a series of sudden, interlinked disasters, both natural and human, where no single event was survivable on its own. The drought weakened the body, the earthquakes broke the bones, and the migrations delivered the coup de grace. Their fate forces us to expand our definition of a cataclysm. It can be a chain reaction, a domino fall where the first tile is tipped by a change in the climate, and the last is a torch set to a palace gate. The silence that followed was so complete it became the stuff of legend, giving birth to biblical tales of cities consumed by fire and brimstone, a cultural memory of a time when the civilized world, in a single generation, turned to ash and silence. Their world was defined by the hunt. The Clovis people, spread across North America over 13,000 years ago, were not settlers of cities but masters of a vast, cold continent. Their signature, elegantly fluted stone spear points, found from coast to coast, tell a story of a highly mobile and successful culture, one that tracked and brought down the great mammoths and mastodons that roamed the land. This was a way of life in perfect balance with a specific Ice Age world. Then, in what seems like a geological instant, that balance was shattered. Around 12,800 years ago, the Clovis culture and the megafauna they relied upon both vanish from the archaeological record. Their disappearance coincides precisely with the onset of a profound climatic event known as the Younger Dryas, a sudden and severe 1,300-year plunge back into near-glacial conditions. What could cause the planet to lurch back into an ice age so abruptly? A controversial but compelling scientific idea offers a dramatic explanation, one that points to the stars. The impact hypothesis suggests this catastrophic cooling was triggered by a cosmic event, likely the airburst or multiple airbursts of a comet or asteroid fragmenting and exploding high over the North American ice sheet. The proposed consequences are the stuff of a disaster epic. The heat from the explosion would have ignited continent-spanning wildfires, scorching millions of square miles of forest and grassland. Vast amounts of dust, soot, and water vapor thrown into the atmosphere would have blotted out the sun, triggering an impact winter, a sudden global cooling that lasted for generations. For the Clovis people, this would not have been a slow environmental change to adapt to, but an instantaneous, continent-wide ecological catastrophe. Imagine the sky turning to fire, then to a perpetual, dusty twilight. The great herds of mammoth, horse, and camel, their grazing lands incinerated and their climate upended, would have died off rapidly. In a single generation, the entire economic and nutritional foundation of the Clovis world simply ceased to exist. The evidence for this hypothesis is found in a mysterious, thin black layer at archaeological sites across the continent, a stratum rich in charcoal, soot, and microscopic diamonds called nanodiamonds, which can only be formed under extreme, impact-related pressure. While the theory remains fiercely debated within the scientific community, it presents a haunting scenario. It suggests that a sophisticated and widespread human culture, the first clearly identifiable civilization of North America, could have been brought to the brink not by disease, not by invasion, but by a sudden, random strike from space. The Clovis people likely did not go extinct in a single day, but their way of life, their technology, and their social structures, all finely tuned to hunting megafauna, would have become obsolete overnight. In the face of such a total ecological reset, the survivors would have been forced into a drastic and rapid cultural transformation, fragmenting into smaller, more generalized groups foraging for whatever scarce resources remained. Their story, if the hypothesis holds, represents perhaps the ultimate scale of vulnerability, a reminder that the trajectory of human civilization can be irrevocably altered by forces entirely beyond our world, a silent visitor from the depths of the cosmos that rewrote the story of a continent. The Sun Gate at Tiwanaku stands as a lonely sentinel over a barren plain. This massive stone portal, carved with a celestial deity, was once the spiritual heart of an Andean empire, a city that drew pilgrims and tribute from across the southern highlands. For centuries, the Tiwanaku Empire thrived at an altitude where most would struggle to breathe, its success built on a breathtaking agricultural innovation. Around the vast, life-giving waters of Lake Titicaca, they engineered a system of raised fields known as suca collis. These were not simple plots, but intricate grids of elevated planting beds separated by water-filled canals. The water absorbed sunlight by day, releasing warmth by night to protect crops from frost, while the decaying aquatic plants in the canals provided constant, rich fertilizer. This system turned the harsh altiplano into a breadbasket, supporting a dense urban population and a powerful, centralized state. Their mastery of this environment seemed absolute until the environment itself changed course. Beginning around the year 1000 CE, paleoclimatologists studying ancient shorelines have uncovered a stark truth. Lake Titicaca began a prolonged and severe recession. A devastating drought lasting for decades caused the lake level to drop dramatically, pulling the shoreline back from the fields and canals that depended on it. The intricate hydraulic balance of the Cucuteni-Trypillia was broken. The canals dried up, the protective thermal mass vanished, and the fertile muck turned to dust. The empire's entire agricultural foundation collapsed in a generation. The result was not a slow migration, but a rapid and catastrophic depopulation. A city built to feed thousands could not sustain itself when its own ingenious fields failed. Without the food surplus, the authority of the priest-kings who mediated with the gods of sun and lake evaporated. The social and political structures that maintained the great city dissolved. People had no choice but to abandon the urban core, dispersing into smaller, scattered communities in search of sustenance. The great ceremonial center, with its precisely aligned temples and monolithic gates, was not sacked or burned. It was simply left, its stones slowly settling into the dry earth. Tiwanaku's story is a profound lesson in the perils of hyperspecialization. They were not a people who failed to adapt. They were brilliant adapters who engineered a paradise within a very specific and stable environmental window. When that window slammed shut due to a climatic shift, their magnificent adaptation became a trap. Their civilization did not gradually decline. It underwent a rapid systemic failure, a sudden unraveling that began with a disappearing shoreline and ended with a silent, empty city where only the stone gods remained, gazing out at a retreating lake. The Sumerians wrote of a pure land, a place of sweet water and eternal life called Dilmun. Far from being mere myth, this was a real civilization centered on the islands of Bahrain, a crucial trading hub that connected the empires of Mesopotamia with the distant cultures of the Indus Valley. For centuries, Dilmun thrived as a green jewel in the Gulf, its wealth built not on conquest but on commerce and a single, miraculous geological gift: vast, bubbling underground freshwater springs that welled up from the seabed itself. These springs, known as Ain, created lush oases in the midst of salt water, allowing for date palm groves and gardens that sustained a sophisticated society of merchants and sailors. Their world was a testament to the abundance a single, reliable resource could provide. Then, around 1800 BCE, the heart of this civilization began to fail. Archaeological records show a rapid depopulation of the main settlements, a swift abandonment that suggests not a slow economic decline, but a sudden, existential crisis. Researchers believe the catastrophe was as subtle as it was absolute: the salinization or outright disappearance of those life-giving springs. The cause was likely geological, a gradual tectonic shift or a rapid change in sea level that allowed denser saltwater to intrude into the underground freshwater aquifers. From a human perspective, this could have happened with terrifying speed. One season, the springs ran clear and sweet; the next, they began to taste of the sea. For an island civilization, this was a death sentence. Agriculture would have collapsed as the soil became poisoned with salt. The very drinking water that sustained every household turned undrinkable. Without its foundational resource, the entire economic reason for Dilmun's existence evaporated. The trade routes that once converged on its ports would have shifted almost overnight to seek more reliable sources of water and supplies. The people of Dilmun faced a choice with no middle ground: stay and face thirst and starvation, or leave. The evidence suggests they left, dispersing across the Gulf and likely being absorbed into other cultures. Their great burial mounds and once bustling ports were left to the encroaching desert. Dilmun's story presents a unique kind of cataclysm, one without fire or quake. It was a silent, creeping disaster that struck at the single point of failure upon which an entire complex society was built. It reminds us that a civilization's greatest strength can also be its most profound vulnerability, and that sometimes the end comes not with a roar, but with the slow, inexorable change in the taste of water. The stone walls of Great Zimbabwe curve against the sky, a silent testament to a kingdom built not on conquest but on connection. This was the heart of a powerful state whose influence stretched across southern Africa, its wealth flowing from vast gold fields to the bustling ports of the Swahili coast. For centuries, this trade was the kingdom's steady heartbeat, funding the construction of its magnificent stone enclosures and supporting a complex hierarchical society. Yet by the 15th century, this great stone capital was largely abandoned. The cause was not an invasion or a volcanic eruption, but a double blow of environmental and economic shocks that severed its vital connections. First, a significant climatic shift appears to have altered the local river systems that supported agriculture around the city. When a river dries up or changes course, it does not simply move water, it moves the foundation of a community. Crops would have failed, straining the local food supply and placing immediate pressure on the population. But the more decisive and sudden catastrophe was likely human in origin. The kingdom's immense power was derived from its position as the middleman in a global network, trading gold and ivory for luxury goods from as far away as China and Persia. If political upheaval on the distant Swahili coast or the rise of new trading rivals suddenly redirected those precious caravans elsewhere, the effect on Zimbabwe would have been instantaneous and catastrophic. Imagine the trade routes not as roads but as lifelines. If those lines are cut, the capital, which existed to manage that wealth, loses its very reason for being. This was an economic cataclysm. The elite, whose authority was tied directly to controlling and distributing this imported wealth, found their power evaporating as the flow of goods slowed to a trickle. Without the economic engine of long-distance trade, the complex social structure that built the stone walls could no longer be sustained. The population likely dispersed to smaller, more self-sufficient settlements, leaving the grand enclosures as monuments to a vanished network. Great Zimbabwe's story expands our understanding of catastrophe. It shows that a civilization can be just as vulnerable to a sudden rupture in the human web of commerce as it is to an earthquake or a drought. Their walls were strong enough to withstand any army, but they could not protect against a silent crisis of connectivity, a world that simply decided to trade elsewhere. The treasury of Petra was carved not for kings but for commerce. Through the narrow, winding Sick, a river of wealth once flowed as camel caravans heavy with frankincense and myrrh moved from southern Arabia to the Mediterranean ports. The Nabateans were not just city builders, they were logistical geniuses who mastered the desert, controlling every well and way station along this overland superhighway. Their capital, Petra, was a monument to this control, a city literally sculpted from the rose-red cliffs as a display of power and prosperity to every traveling merchant. Their entire civilization was a single, brilliant adaptation to a specific economic reality. Then, in the 1st century CE, that reality was rewritten not by a storm or quake, but by a decision made in distant Rome. The Roman Empire, seeking greater efficiency and security for its lucrative spice trade, invested heavily in developing direct sea routes down the Red Sea. This was an economic cataclysm for Petra. The overland caravan trade, the city's sole reason for existence, was undercut almost overnight. Why would merchants pay for protection, water, and tolls on a grueling months-long desert journey when a ship could carry more goods faster and cheaper directly to Egyptian ports? The lifeblood of Nabatean wealth began to drain away. A major earthquake in 363 CE did cause significant physical damage to the city's structures, but by then, Petra was already a patient in decline. The quake damaged a body whose economic heart had already stopped beating. Without the constant influx of trade wealth, the city could not fund the repairs or maintain the sophisticated hydraulic systems that channeled flash floods and stored water. The magnificent tombs and temples became what they are today, not abandoned in panic, but vacated through a quiet, irreversible economic strangulation. The population dwindled as opportunities vanished, leaving the stone facades to face the silent desert. Petra's fate is a masterclass in a different kind of vulnerability. It shows that a cataclysm does not need to be geological to be absolute. A shift in global trade patterns, a new technological advantage in transportation, can act with the same devastating speed as a volcano or drought. Their civilization was engineered for a specific route on the map, and when that route was erased by the sails of Roman ships, their entire world became a beautiful, empty monument to a vanished current of gold and spice. Silver from Tartessos was the currency of empires. This civilization, flourishing in the marshlands of what is now southern Spain, was not a myth but a historical powerhouse, a crucial trading partner for the Phoenician merchants who plied the Mediterranean. Greek historians like Herodotus wrote of its incredible wealth in metals, a kingdom where silver seemed as common as stone. For centuries, Tartessos thrived as a gateway between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, its culture a unique blend of local Iberian and Phoenician influences. Then, around 500 BCE, it vanished from the historical record with a suddenness that has baffled scholars ever since. One year it was a major force, the next only silence. This disappearance is so complete that archaeologists still debate the exact location of its capital city, making Tartessos less a ruin and more a ghost in the landscape. How does an entire, wealthy civilization simply evaporate, leaving behind little more than its name in ancient texts? The leading theories all point to a single, overwhelming element: water. The Guadalquivir River, which gave the Tartessians life, may have delivered their end. One compelling possibility is a catastrophic tsunami, perhaps triggered by a distant earthquake or underwater landslide in the Atlantic. A massive wave surging up the river valley would have been an unstoppable force, drowning the low-lying capital and its surrounding farmlands in a single, terrible day. The destruction would have been absolute, leaving no survivors to rebuild the complex trade networks or political structures. Another theory suggests a slower, but no less fatal, aquatic disaster. A period of extreme and persistent rainfall could have caused the Guadalquivir to overflow its banks repeatedly, not with a single wave, but with a series of devastating floods. Each flood would have submerged the city, ruined harvests, and salted the fields, making recovery impossible. After years of this relentless assault, the population would have had no choice but to abandon their homeland entirely, dispersing inland and losing their cohesive cultural identity in the process. There is a third, equally sudden possibility: a geographic betrayal. The very harbor that made Tartessos rich, its connection to the wider world, could have been choked shut overnight. A major landslide upstream or a dramatic shift in river currents could have dumped an enormous volume of silt and sediment directly across the harbor mouth. Imagine the traders' horror as they returned from a voyage to find their deep water port transformed into a shallow, impassable lagoon. The economic lifeblood of the civilization would have been severed in an instant. Without the ability to export silver and import goods, the city's wealth and reason for being would have evaporated. The ruling elite's power derived from controlling this trade would have collapsed. In any of these scenarios, the result is the same, a rapid and irreversible erasure. The people of Tartessos did not necessarily die out, but their political unity and distinct cultural footprint were dissolved by the water that once sustained them. Their story is the ultimate archaeological ghost story, a reminder that some civilizations leave behind not crumbling walls, but only a resonant silence and a lingering question. What does it mean for a culture to be so thoroughly reclaimed by the landscape that even its heart remains hidden, waiting for the mud to finally give up its secrets? Their silver bought the world's attention, but their power was written on the grasslands. The Xiongnu Confederacy was not a city of stone, but an empire on horseback, a vast political force that stretched across the Mongolian steppe and challenged the might of Han China for centuries. This was a civilization built on mobility, its wealth and strength measured in the endless herds that moved with the seasons. Their entire social and military structure, from the warrior aristocracy to the humblest herder, depended on one thing: the health of the grass beneath their horses' hooves. In the late 1st century CE, this foundational element betrayed them. The Confederacy, which had long been a unified threat to its settled neighbors, fragmented with startling speed, its constituent tribes scattering southward in a desperate migration. The cause was not a lost battle, but a lost climate. Emerging research from paleoclimatologists points to a period of rapid and severe environmental deterioration on the steppe at precisely this time. By studying sediment cores from ancient lakes, scientists can read the history of the region's aridity in layers of mud and pollen. The data reveals a stark shift towards intense and prolonged drought conditions. For a nomadic pastoral society, this was an existential crisis. The grasslands that sustained their horses, the very engine of their military might, and their sheep and cattle, the basis of their food and wealth, simply withered away. A herd cannot eat dust. This ecological catastrophe would have triggered a rapid and devastating chain reaction. As pastures failed, herds dwindled, leading directly to widespread famine. The social contract that held the Confederacy together, based on a leader's ability to provide grazing rights and distribute resources, shattered under the strain of scarcity. When there is not enough grass for all, loyalty becomes a luxury. Internal conflicts flared as different clans and tribes fought over the remaining viable pasturelands. The centralized authority of the Chanyu, the Xiongnu ruler, dissolved as regional leaders broke away to secure survival for their own people. The political entity, the Great Confederacy, did not fall to a foreign army. It unraveled from within under the pressure of hunger and competition. The southward migration was not a planned campaign of conquest, but a frantic collective movement of refugees fleeing a dying landscape. Their fate offers a profound lesson in a different kind of fragility. The Xiongnu were the ultimate adapters to their environment, masters of a life in motion. Yet their entire civilization was hyper-specialized, exquisitely tuned to the specific rhythms of the steppe. When those rhythms changed abruptly, when the climate shifted faster than their herds could move, their greatest strength, mobility, became insufficient. They could flee the drought, but they could not outrun the total collapse of the ecosystem that defined them. Their story reminds us that even the most fluid and resilient political structures are built upon an environmental foundation. When that foundation crumbles into dust, the empire built upon it disperses like sand in the wind, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats moving desperately toward a distant, greener horizon. A rabbit leaps across the curve of a clay bowl, forever caught in mid-bound. This is the legacy of the Mimbres people, who inhabited the river valleys of what is now southwestern New Mexico. Their world was not one of towering stone pyramids, but of villages built into the earth, pit house dwellings clustered along life-giving waterways. Their true monument was their art, an explosion of creativity expressed on bowls of stunning white clay painted with intricate black design. These were not mere patterns, they were narratives, scenes of ritual, of hunting, of mythical beings and everyday moments, all rendered with a fluid, confident line that feels startlingly modern. This beautiful black-on-white pottery represents a cultural zenith, a visual language that defined who they were. Then, around 1130 CE, the brushes were put down, the kilns grew cold, and this entire artistic tradition ceased with an abruptness that still puzzles archaeologists. The end of the Mimbres Classic period was not a fade to grey, it was a sudden, clean break in the archaeological record. The cause lies in the same environmental catastrophe that emptied Chaco Canyon to the north, the Great Drought. For the Mimbres, whose agriculture depended entirely on the seasonal flows of the Mimbres and Gila rivers, this prolonged arid period was devastating. As the rivers shrank to trickles and the springs dried up, the careful balance of their society was upended. Compounding the drought was a quieter, slower-moving pressure, their own success. A growing population over the preceding centuries may have gradually depleted the local resources, the delicate riparian woodlands used for fuel and building, and the game animals that supplemented their diet. When the drought hit, this already strained system had no resilience left. The cultural collapse was swift and total. The production of their iconic pottery, a complex craft requiring specific clays, fuels, and a stable society with time for artisans to specialize, stopped almost overnight. This was more than an industry failing. It was the extinguishing of a primary pillar of their identity. Without the food surplus that allowed for such artistic specialization, and likely facing severe social strife over dwindling resources, the very reason to create in that specific communal style vanished. The pit house villages were abandoned, not in a planned migration, but in a necessary, rapid dispersal. The Mimbres people did not vanish, but their distinct cultural footprint did. They likely scattered, joining or merging with other Puebloan groups in areas where water was still reliable, adapting their traditions and eventually blending into the broader tapestry of ancestral Puebloan culture. Their story is a poignant reminder that a cataclysm can be cultural as much as it is physical. An entire way of seeing the world, a unique artistic vision refined over generations, can be silenced not by an invader's sword, but by a deepening thirst. The silent, empty pit houses and the last, unfinished bowls speak of a world where survival suddenly demanded a different kind of creativity, one that left no beautiful, black-on-white record behind. Their pyramids were a final, defiant echo. At Meroe, far up the Nile in what is now Sudan, the rulers of the Kingdom of Kush built their own steep-sided monuments, a clear statement that their civilization was a peer and successor to ancient Egypt. For centuries, this was a capital of immense power, a center of iron production and long-distance trade that connected sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean world. Its wealth seemed as solid as the stone of its temples. Yet by the 4th century CE, Meroe was emptying out, its political unity dissolving with a speed that belied its long history. The cause was not a foreign invasion, but a slow-moving environmental process that reached a sudden, catastrophic tipping point. The kingdom was being slowly strangled by the desert itself. A process we call desertification, the transformation of fertile land into barren desert, accelerated dramatically around Meroe. This was driven by a natural climatic shift towards greater aridity, but it was severely worsened by human activity. The kingdom's great industrial strength was its iron production, a technology that gave it economic and military advantage. But to fuel the constant high-temperature fires of their smelters, they needed enormous quantities of charcoal. To make charcoal, they cut down the surrounding acacia forests. Year after year, the ring of deforestation expanded outward from the city. This created a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. Without the tree roots to hold the soil in place, the thin topsoil simply blew away when the winds came. Without the protective canopy, the ground baked harder under the sun. The land's ability to retain what little moisture fell from the sky vanished. The desert did not just approach the city, it was invited in by the axes of its own people. What had been a gradual change for generations suddenly crossed a critical threshold. The agricultural lands that fed the urban population failed, quite literally turning to dust. At the same time, the very industry that had caused the problem collapsed, as the forests needed to sustain it were now too distant or completely gone. The kingdom faced a simultaneous agricultural and industrial collapse. This profound internal weakness was exploited by a rising rival. The Aksumite Empire, based in the Ethiopian highlands, was expanding its own trade networks. As Meroe weakened from within, Aksum moved to control the lucrative trade routes that had been the kingdom's lifeline. The double blow was devastating. Without food from its hinterlands or wealth from its trade, the royal court at Meroe lost all means to project power or command loyalty. The centralized state fragmented rapidly. The population dispersed, leaving the pyramids and palaces to stand alone in a landscape they had helped to create. The silence at Meroe is a powerful lesson in delayed consequence. It shows that a cataclysm does not always arrive from outside. Sometimes, a civilization meticulously prepares its own downfall over centuries through practices that seem necessary for prosperity. The end comes not when the first tree is cut, but when the last one falls and the society realizes too late that it has traded its future for the fuel of its present. Their story asks us to consider the thresholds we cannot see, the invisible lines in the sand that, once crossed, leave a great city listening only to the wind. The paint on their pottery was the color of the sky after a fire. For the Sinagua people of what is now northern Arizona, the world was defined by the immense, quiet presence of the San Francisco peaks, a landscape of high desert and pine. Theirs was a life of careful balance, farming maize and beans in the thin soil, a testament to resilience in a dry land. Then, around the year 1085, the mountain spoke. The eruption of Sunset Crater was not a slow geological grumble, but a violent, earth-shattering explosion. A new volcano tore open the ground, spewing fountains of molten rock and raining down a thick, black blanket of cinders and ash over hundreds of square miles. For the Sinagua, it must have seemed like the end of the world. A sky turned to flame and then to a choking, sunless twilight. In the immediate aftermath, the land would have appeared utterly lifeless, a scorched and sterile wasteland. But then, something remarkable happened. As the ash settled and cooled, it began to perform an unexpected alchemy. This layer of volcanic cinder acted like a mulch, a porous blanket over the soil. It trapped precious moisture from the rare rains, slowing evaporation under the fierce desert sun. It also released minerals, effectively fertilizing the ground below. Where there had been marginal farmland, there were suddenly fields of unexpected fertility. The catastrophe had delivered a gift. This volcanic blessing triggered a dramatic transformation. Agricultural yields soared. The population, which had likely been scattered and small, began to grow rapidly. People were drawn to the enriched lands around the eruption zone. This period saw the flourishing of impressive settlements, like the multi-story pueblo at Wupatki, with its over 100 rooms, a ceremonial ball court, and a community room suggesting a complex, centralized society. The Sinagua culture entered a golden age, a boom powered directly by the aftermath of a geological nightmare. Their success, however, contained the seeds of a new vulnerability. The population boom was built on an agricultural system supercharged by a one-time event. As generations passed, the community grew dependent on the high productivity of those cinder-mulched fields. Researchers like Mark Elson suggest this very success may have led to overpopulation, straining other resources like water, game, and firewood in the surrounding area. The society became exquisitely tuned to a specific and ultimately temporary condition. Then the climate shifted. A prolonged drought, part of the same dry period that affected Chaco and the Mimbres, began to grip the region in the 12th and 13th centuries. Even the magical cinder mulch could not compensate for a complete lack of rain. The water table dropped, springs dried up, and the once fertile fields began to fail. The Sinagua found themselves in a cruel paradox. They were more numerous than ever before, thanks to the volcano's gift, but now faced a scarcity that their larger population could not withstand. The very prosperity that the cataclysm created made the subsequent environmental downturn catastrophic. The result was not a sudden invasion, but a strategic, rapid dispersal. Within a generation or two, the great pueblos like Wupatki were systematically abandoned. The people did not vanish, they migrated, likely splitting into smaller family groups and moving to areas with more reliable water sources, joining other Puebloan communities to the north and east. The silence they left behind is a profound lesson in irony and unintended consequence. The Sinagua story is unique in our journey, a case where a sudden, violent cataclysm did not destroy a civilization, but midwifed its greatest flourishing. Yet, by enabling that intense period of growth and concentration, it also set the stage for a later, more vulnerable collapse when the next inevitable shift arrived. It asks us to consider the double-edged sword of prosperity and how a society's greatest strength can, in a changing world, become its most dangerous point of failure. The black cinders of Sunset Crater remain, a permanent monument to a day of fire that first gave life and then indirectly took a way of life away. Monk's Mound still rises from the Illinois floodplain, a silent pyramid of earth that once commanded a city of 20,000 people. Cahokia was the undeniable heart of the Mississippian world, a sprawling metropolis of thatched roof houses, bustling plazas, and a complex society that traded seashells from the Gulf and copper from the Great Lakes. Its leaders orchestrated the movement of earth on a staggering scale, building over 120 mounds for ceremony, burial, and residence. This was a civilization that harnessed the Mississippi's gift, the incredibly fertile soil deposited by its seasonal floods, to create an agricultural surplus that fed a continent's first great city. Yet that same river, in a changing climate, would become the instrument of its unraveling. Scientists studying sediment cores from nearby Horseshoe Lake have uncovered a stark timeline written in mud. The layers reveal a series of catastrophic floods striking the region with increasing frequency and severity in the 13th and 14th centuries. For a city built directly on the river's floodplain, this was not an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. Imagine the river not as a gentle provider, but as a sudden, overwhelming force. A single major flood could drown the maize fields at the critical moment before harvest, washing away a year's food supply in a matter of days. It would inundate the low-lying residential districts, ruining stored grain, damaging homes, and contaminating drinking water. Cahokians were master farmers, but their entire settlement pattern was a calculated risk, placing their greatest population density directly in the path of the river's most powerful moods. The problem was not one flood, but the relentless, repeated nature of the disaster. Just as the community would begin to recover, rebuilding homes and replanting fields, another flood would arrive, erasing their progress. This cycle of destruction created a state of permanent insecurity. Food stores could not be reliably replenished, leading to periods of scarcity and malnutrition that would have frayed the social fabric. The authority of the ruling class, likely tied to ensuring agricultural abundance and mediating with the spiritual forces of sun and river, would have been severely undermined when their ceremonies failed to hold back the waters. This environmental stress was compounded by other pressures. Centuries of intensive maize farming may have depleted the once rich soils. A growing population would have placed immense strain on local resources like firewood and game. Tree ring data also suggests the region experienced significant climate fluctuations during this period, including periods of drought that would have further stressed the food system between floods. The people of Cahokia found themselves in a tightening vise, caught between a river that would not stop rising and a land that could no longer reliably produce. The response was not a sudden, panicked evacuation, but a gradual, strategic dissolution. Over several generations, the great city emptied out. Families and kin groups likely made the difficult decision to leave, dispersing along the river's tributaries and into the surrounding uplands where flood risk was lower. They carried their Mississippian traditions with them, but the political and ceremonial unity centered on Monk's Mound could not be sustained without the concentrated population and agricultural surplus that the floodplain in its kinder seasons had provided. By the 1300s, the grand plazas were quiet. The mounds, once vibrant stages for ritual and power, were reclaimed by grass. Cahokia's story is a profound lesson in the duality of foundational resources. The very thing that made the civilization possible, the fertile floodplain, became the source of its destabilization when the climate shifted the river's behavior. It shows that a society's greatest asset can, under changing conditions, transform into its most persistent adversary. The mounds remain not as ruins of conquest, but as monuments to a resilient people who ultimately chose to disperse rather than fight a losing battle against a rising tide, leaving their earthen testament to a river's changing heart. Their facades were a tapestry of stone, a mosaic of rain gods and celestial serpents woven across the faces of palaces. In the rolling limestone hills of the Yucatan, the Puuc Maya built a world of startling elegance, cities like Aksum and Caba that rose to prominence just as the great centers of the southern lowlands fell into silence. This was the terminal classic period, and the Puuc region became a final, brilliant flowering of Maya urbanism, a testament to human ingenuity in a landscape with no surface rivers, no lakes. Their survival and their stunning architecture was built on a single precious resource, captured rainwater. They transformed their entire environment into a machine for holding every drop. The ground beneath their cities was honeycombed with natural sinkholes called cenotes, which they widened and maintained. They paved plazas with plaster to channel runoff into vast underground cisterns, and built intricate systems of reservoirs and choltons, bottle-shaped storage chambers carved into the bedrock. Their ornate facades were more than art, they were a declaration of control over a capricious sky. For a time, this system worked beautifully, supporting a sophisticated society of astronomers, artisans, and scribes. Then the sky withheld its gift. The same regional mega-droughts that contributed to the earlier southern collapse crept northward, intensifying in the 9th and 10th centuries. For the Puuc Maya, this was not just a drought, it was the failure of their entire technological premise. Their brilliant adaptation had a critical threshold. The cisterns and reservoirs were designed to bridge the normal dry season, not to withstand decades of minimal rainfall. As the years passed with only sparse rains, the vast underground tanks would have slowly emptied. The water level in the cenotes would have dropped, then vanished into the deep limestone, leaving only a dry, echoing cavern. What does a water-based society do when its last reservoir turns to dust? The crisis would have been sudden in its social impact. Once the reserves were critically low, the delicate balance shattered. Agriculture, dependent on stored water for irrigation, would have collapsed completely. The social order, likely centered on elites who managed and distributed the water supply, would have lost all legitimacy. The very priests who invoked the rain gods from the tops of their mosaic-adorned temples would have been seen as failures. This was a catastrophe of confidence as much as thirst. The archaeological record shows a remarkably rapid abandonment. Unlike a slow decline where buildings fall into disrepair over generations, the Puuc sites show evidence of construction halted mid-project, valuables left in place, and a clean break in occupation. It suggests a point of collective realization, a moment when the community understood the systems could not recover, and the only rational choice was to leave. They did not vanish but dispersed, likely migrating north to the coast where groundwater was more accessible, or south into the forests, joining other Maya groups. Their ornate cities, those stone tapestries of triumph, were left to the encroaching jungle, silent monuments to a simple, devastating equation. The Puuk story offers a final, poignant lesson about the limits of adaptation. It shows that our most brilliant solutions often define the specific ways in which we can fail. They mastered their dry world so completely that they became exquisitely vulnerable to one particular kind of disaster, a prolonged absence. Their legacy whispers from the hills, a reminder that survival is not about conquering nature, but about maintaining a resilience flexible enough for when the rules of the world quite suddenly change. Their script remains a silent puzzle, a language etched in clay that we can see but cannot hear. In the stark, sun-baked deserts between the Kopet-Dag Mountains and the Oxus River, the people of the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex built a world of startling order. Their settlements, like Ghana Depe in modern Turkmenistan, were not haphazard collections of homes, but fortified oases of geometric precision. Within high walls, they constructed distinct residential quarters, craft workshops, and imposing temple complexes, all laid out with an almost ritualistic attention to alignment and space. This was a civilization of artisans and traders, producing distinctive compartmented metal seals and vessels of a cool, chlorite stone, artifacts that speak of a rich symbolic world and far-flung connections reaching to the Indus Valley and the Iranian Plateau. Their society was a brilliant adaptation to an arid land, a testament to human ingenuity where life was made possible by the life-giving fingers of rivers like the Amu Darya reaching into the sand. Then, around 1800 BCE, the lights in these desert fortresses went out. The settlements were not destroyed by war. There is no layer of ash from sacked cities. Instead, the archaeology shows a pattern of rapid, orderly abandonment. Buildings were left intact, artifacts were sometimes placed carefully, as if the inhabitants expected to return, but they never did. The silence that followed is profound. What could cause an entire, sophisticated culture to simply walk away from its carefully constructed world, leaving its secrets behind in the dust? The answer may lie in the very rivers that gave them life. This civilization existed in a precarious balance, a network of oasis settlements entirely dependent on the flow of snowmelt from distant mountains through the Amu Darya and Murghab river systems. A sudden shift in these waterways would have been an absolute catastrophe. Tectonic activity, a not uncommon event in this seismically active region, could have literally moved the earth beneath the riverbeds. A single, powerful earthquake might have uplifted the land in one area, causing a river to suddenly divert its course, abandoning its old channel and the settlements that depended on it. Alternatively, a rapid climatic shift towards greater aridity could have reduced the glacial melt feeding the rivers, causing them to shrink and retreat over just a few generations. In either scenario, the effect on the Oxus civilization would have been immediate and devastating. The intricate irrigation canals that fed their fields would have run dry. The gardens and orchards within the oasis walls would have withered under the relentless sun. The agricultural surplus that allowed for specialization for priests and metalworkers and administrators would have vanished. A society cannot maintain temples and fortifications when its people are consumed by the daily crisis of finding water. This was not a slow decline where people could adapt their farming techniques. This was the sudden, irreversible loss of the foundational resource. The response would have been migration, a rapid and wholesale dispersal. Clans and family groups facing thirst and hunger would have had no choice but to gather what they could carry and leave, following the retreating waters or striking out across the desert in search of new rivers. This physical scattering led directly to cultural dissolution. Without the centralizing force of their fortified centers, without the shared rituals in their distinctive temples, the complex web of symbols, technologies, and social structures that defined them unraveled. The knowledge of their script, likely used for administrative or ritual purposes within those specific oasis communities, was lost because the communities that needed it ceased to exist. They melted into the broader populations of Central Asia, their unique identity absorbed and transformed. Their story is a haunting parallel to that of the distant Harappans, another river-fed civilization that fragmented when its waters changed course. It underscores a universal vulnerability. A culture can reach astonishing heights of complexity and artistry, creating sealed orders and monumental architecture, yet its entire existence can be contingent on the path of a single river. When that river decides, through the slow grind of tectonics or the whim of a changing climate, to take a different road, the civilization built upon its banks is left as a ghost in the desert, a collection of empty rooms waiting for a water that will never come again. Their unreadable script is the final, fitting symbol of their end, a message left behind in a language that the desert itself has forgotten how to speak. Their towers stood like silent sentinels, watching over a world that was coming apart. Across the island of Sardinia, the Nuragic people raised thousands of stone fortresses, Nuraghi, that gave their culture its name and its enduring image. These were not simple huts, but complex, conical towers of dry stone masonry, sometimes grouped into fortified compounds that dominated the hills. For centuries, this civilization thrived, its artisans crafting intricate bronze figurines, and its communities engaging in a vibrant trade that connected their island to the wider Mediterranean. Theirs was a world of local strength and distant connections, a balance that held firm for generations. Then, around 900 BCE, that balance was shattered by a wave of chaos that originated far from their shores. The Nuragic civilization found itself caught in the catastrophic undertow of the late Bronze Age collapse, a victim of a regional cataclysm it did not create. The immediate threat likely arrived on the horizon in the form of warships. Historical records from Egypt and the Levant speak ominously of the Sea Peoples, a confederation of raiders and migrants whose incursions helped topple empires. While their exact origins are debated, their impact on coastal societies was devastating. For a seafaring culture like the Nuragic, whose prosperity depended on secure ports and trade routes, the sudden appearance of these predatory fleets would have been an economic and existential disaster. Maritime trade, the lifeblood that brought in metals, luxury goods, and ideas, would have ground to a halt. Coastal settlements became targets, forcing a retreat inland and a severing of the vital links to the wider world. This external pressure, however, may have been the spark that ignited a deeper internal crisis. A civilization defined by its monumental tower building suddenly stopped erecting new Nuraghi. The archaeological record shows a clear shift away from these grand, centralized structures toward smaller, simpler, and more defensible settlements in the island's interior. This is not the pattern of a society evolving, but of one fragmenting under immense stress. The construction of a Nurag was a colossal communal effort, requiring organized labor, resources, and a shared cultural purpose. When that collective purpose vanishes, the towers remain as monuments to a lost unity. The cessation of building suggests a rapid dissolution of the social hierarchy and the centralized authority that could command such projects. It points to a society turning inward, focusing on bare survival rather than monumental expression. The collapse was likely a compound fracture. The breakdown of Mediterranean trade networks would have caused a sudden, sharp economic shock, impoverishing the elite who controlled that trade and disrupting the distribution of essential goods. In this climate of scarcity and fear, the very social contract that held Nuragic society together may have come undone. local chieftains, once part of a broader cultural network, could have turned against each other in competition for dwindling resources. The common people whose labor built the towers may have withdrawn their support from leaders who could no longer provide security or prosperity. What followed was not an invasion that wiped the island clean, but a rapid cultural unraveling. The sophisticated bronze working traditions declined, the distinctive artistic styles faded. The Neuragic people did not disappear, but their civilization, as a unified and monumental culture, effectively dissolved. They retreated into a more isolated, village-based way of life, their great towers left as silent reminders of a more connected and confident age. Their story offers a final, crucial perspective on catastrophe. It demonstrates that a civilization can be terminated not by a single geological event, but by a sudden rupture in the human web around it. The Neuragic world was not buried by ash or drowned by a tsunami. It was starved of connection and shattered by fear. Its towers stand today not as ruins of a conquest, but as monuments to a fragile truth, that even the most enduring societies are woven into a wider tapestry, and when that tapestry is torn, the strongest threads can still come undone. A wooden tablet holds a language no one alive can read. On Rapa Nui, the story of collapse reaches its most intimate and haunting form, not in the fall of a city, but in the silencing of a written voice. The Rongorongo script, a system of glyphs carved on wood, is our 30th and final lost civilization. It represents a cataclysm of knowledge, the sudden extinction of an entire intellectual world. When the society that created the Moche unraveled through environmental strain and internal conflict, it was vulnerable to the final, external blows that arrived with European contact in the 18th century. This period brought a wave of profound hardship, from introduced illnesses to tragic instances of forced labor that scattered the island's population. Within a single generation, the literate class, the priests, elders, or scholars who held the key to the script, was gone. The knowledge of how to read Rongorongo did not fade slowly. It was severed abruptly and completely. The wooden tablets themselves were repurposed, burned, or lost, leaving only a handful of enigmatic survivors. This is a different kind of disappearance. We are not looking at empty houses or silent temples, but at pages full of words that have become a visual pattern without a sound. The loss is profound. Those glyphs were not simple accounting marks. Researchers believe they recorded genealogy, creation chants, and navigational lore, the very soul and memory of the people. When the last reader passed, an entire library of history, poetry, and identity turned into an artifact, a beautiful and impenetrable secret. The intellectual cataclysm of Rongorongo forces us to expand our definition of what can be wiped out. A civilization is not just stone and bone. It is the fragile, living thread of shared understanding passed from one mind to another. That thread can be cut in an instant by the chaos that follows societal collapse. The silent tablets are a monument to this ultimate fragility. They remind us that the greatest treasure of any culture is its memory, and that the most permanent ruins are sometimes not made of stone, but of forgotten meaning. These 30 silences speak a common, urgent language. Each story of collapse, from the ash-choked streets of Akrotiri to the empty cisterns of the Puke, reveals a civilization reaching a point of no return, a moment where the world they mastered suddenly changed the rules. We see a planet that is not a static stage for human history, but an active, volatile participant. The ground can open, the sky can withhold its rain for generations, and a single river can abandon its course, each acting with a force that renders human monuments and political systems irrelevant. These are not tales of failure, but of profound vulnerability shared by every complex society. A clear pattern emerges from the dust, the recurring power of rapid climate shifts. Whether it was the Mega-Drought that emptied Cahokia and Chaco, the sudden aridification that shattered the Akkadian Empire, or the volcanic winters that followed eruptions like Thera, the message is unmistakable. A stable climate is the invisible foundation upon which all agriculture, all surplus, and therefore all civilization is built. When that foundation trembles, everything built upon it begins to crack. These ancient peoples were brilliant adapters, but their adaptations were often finely tuned to a specific environmental window. When the window slammed shut, their ingenuity became a relic. Equally telling is the devastating speed of geological forces. An earthquake can topple the walls of Mycenaean in minutes. A mega-tsunami can drown the ports of the Minoans in an hour. The eruption of Sunset Crater can rewrite a landscape in a day. These events operate on a timescale that human societies, with their slow cycles of planting, harvest, and governance, are fundamentally unequipped to handle. They represent a raw, indifferent power that does not negotiate, a reminder that we inhabit a planet whose deep rhythms care nothing for our calendars or our kingdoms. Perhaps the most resonant lesson is the fragility of interconnected systems. The Hittite Empire did not fall because it was weak, but because a famine triggered by drought exposed every other weakness, leaving it hollow and ready to fragment. The Greenland Norse did not vanish from a single storm, but from a tightening knot of cooling climate, lost supply lines, and a rigid cultural identity that prevented adaptation. These stories show that collapse is rarely a single cause, but a cascade where an environmental shock stresses the social, economic, and political systems to a breaking point. The complexity that makes a society great also creates more points of potential failure. So what do these echoes from the past mean for us today? Our technology has created an illusion of separation, a belief that we have insulated ourselves from the natural world. We build skyscrapers that sway but do not fall in earthquakes, and we move food across continents with the click of a button, yet our fundamental dependencies remain unchanged. We still need predictable seasons to grow food at a global scale. We still build our greatest cities on coasts and rivers, in the shadow of fault lines and volcanoes. Our own complex, just-in-time systems of trade, energy, and information are more interconnected, and therefore potentially more fragile than any ancient network. These lost civilizations are not just footnotes, they are mirrors. They ask us to look with humility at the foundations of our own world. They challenge us to think about resilience not as strength against a single known threat, but as flexibility in the face of the unknown. How do we build societies that can bend without breaking when the unexpected arrives, as it always does? The stories we have explored are not prophecies of doom, but a deep well of collective experience. They teach us that the ultimate test of a civilization may not be how high it builds, but how wisely it listens to the whispers of the past and the shifting rhythms of the earth. Which of these 30 silences speaks most clearly to you? Share your thoughts and join us as we continue to uncover the profound mysteries written in the stones and the soil of our shared human story.